So what is happening to the Venezuela economy? So essentially they're in economic hell. And how did they get there? On Blackboard you can see news clips about Venezuela and what it's like to be there right now. But let's use what we know about the 7 goals and what we've learned so far about economics to understand what's happening in Venezuela. Well, Venezuela, 95% of their exports are oil. Okay. Well, if most of their money comes from exporting oil, and we know that the price of oil has dropped considerably in the last couple of years, what does that do to the country? Well, what that means is that their GDP, their gross domestic product, the value of what they sell, has dropped considerably. Why? Because they're not selling as much oil to the rest of the world because countries like the US and Canada are making their own, and the price of oil has fallen substantially. So the amount of oil they are selling, they're not making a lot of money on. So that means that the value of what they're producing has dropped. Their economy is shrinking. So negative economic growth. Now, if people aren't buying their oil, so let's say there's a decrease in demand for oil, what does that do to the value of their currency? Well, if other countries are no longer buying Venezuelan oil, then they don't need Venezuelan currency. So the demand for Venezuela's currency has decreased. So what then happens to the value of their currency? Well, whenever there's a decrease in demand for anything, the price or value falls. So the Venezuelan currency drops in value. Okay. Well, to fix this problem, what Venezuela did is they pegged their exchange rate. Okay. So they didn't want to allow their currency to fluctuate as much. They couldn't have their currency drop substantially in value, so they fixed the amount of the currency to other currencies. The problem with this is if you want to maintain that pegged exchange rate, you're going to have to use monetary policy to do it. And remember, monetary policy consists of 2 things. What are those 2 parts to monetary policy? Money supply and interest rates. So Venezuela can manipulate the amount of money in circulation, and they can manipulate their interest rates to maintain the value of their currency. So how do you maintain the value of your currency? How do you keep your value of your money from falling? So to prop up their currency, they need there to be an increase in demand for the Venezuelan currency. Well, how do you do that? Well, if you do things like raise interest rates, like what's happening right now in Canada, we raise interest rates, and what's happening to the Canadian dollar? So if we raise interest rates, our Canadian dollar goes up in value. Same thing is true when Venezuela raises their interest rates. More people want to invest in the country, get a higher return on their investment, and it strengthens their currency. It makes the demand for their currency go back up and the value of their currency go back up. Well, if you raise interest rates to prop up your exchange rate, what does that do to the people within your country? Well, if you are in Venezuela and now you have to pay higher interest rates, are you going to get financing? Are you going to borrow? Are you going to buy a car? Are you going to buy a house? That increase in interest rates causes there to be a decrease in what we call consumer spending. Households are buying less stuff. And what impact that has on the GDP is it causes the economy to shrink further. Well, the problem with the declining GDP is that the unemployment rate goes up when the economy is shrinking. So less people have jobs. And if less people have jobs, their income is less. And if they have less income, then the amount that they're paying, sorry, I lost my image here, and the amount that they're paying in taxes goes down. So the economy is shrinking, people don't have jobs, income is going down, so taxes are going down. So what does that do to the government's budget? So government spending versus taxation. Well, if these taxes are falling, then that makes the government go into deficit spending. They're spending more than they're bringing in taxes. Well, deficits year after year become debt. And the problem is that when you have lots of debt, so you don't have the money to get the economy going, to stimulate the economy that's shrinking. You need that money to stimulate the economy. But there's less taxes being paid and less people with jobs. And you already don't have enough money because you're deficit spending. Well, if you have debt year after year, then you become high risk. Nobody wants to lend you money. So how do you entice other countries to lend your government money? Well, the International Monetary Fund, for example, lends money to countries to help them. The International Monetary Fund actually refused to lend Venezuela any money. And that's because, as while this is happening, Venezuela is restricting prices. Remember, they've outlawed inflation. So because they believe that it's hurting the economy. Well, if you can't borrow money, how do you entice people to lend you money? You have to charge higher interest rates. So you raise the interest rate even further. And Venezuela then can't find anyone to lend them money. They're high risk. The economy's not doing well. They keep raising interest rates to entice more investment. That's hurting people domestically. And so what does Venezuela do? They print money. Well, when you print money, you now have more cash chasing the same goods. And so what that does is it makes the price of everything go up. They get hyperinflation. Right? They've had over 500% inflation in the last year. To deal with this, the government intervenes, says you can't raise prices, where you're freezing all the prices, and that, of course, hurts businesses whose costs are still going up, even though they can't charge more for goods. So Venezuela has actually stopped keeping track of the inflation level. You're seeing rioting in the streets. Why? Because people don't have jobs. They don't have income. Things are more expensive. And where the government has regulated the prices of goods to protect the citizens, there's no goods available at all. So for example, why would you want to be a coffee farmer if the cost to make the coffee has gone up? Because, for example, there's been a drought and you can't produce as much coffee with the same amount of land and labor. So the per unit cost of the coffee has increased, but you can't charge more for it. Well, why would you want to be in the coffee making business? So you quit. In Venezuela, we've seen companies like Coca-Cola can't raise their prices. The cost of sugar is on the world market. It's become more expensive. Coca-Cola says, why would I even be in Venezuela? And they've left. So a number of international companies have left Venezuela entirely because they can't afford to produce there and they can't sell their goods there. So they've left. So the price controls have also created problems with the economy, and that you see here how all these goals that we're talking about are interrelated, and how decisions made by an economy or by a country impact your ability to achieve those different goals. And we can see here Venezuela is in economic hell.